Welcome to the Vacation Rental Show, How We Grow. This is your essential playbook to grow and scale your vacation rental business. With advice and insights from the best in the biz, I'm your host, Lynell Gordon. You really started on ground level. Doing customer support is one of the best ways to learn a business, period. Hands down. So you started doing customer support, and then what happened?
So we did that for about 2 years or so. And I watched the company. I was the official lucky number 13th hire at the
That's
company.
amazing.
And yeah, it's just wild in hindsight, it really is. And so we saw the company obviously continue to grow, right? 200, 300, 400, 500 people. Um,
Wow.
and so I eventually was managing a remote team of air crew, they called it, which I think Airbnb was ahead of the curve, right, in terms of bringing in this remote staff. And
Mm-hmm.
I give them a ton of credit too, because it wasn't, when you think of customer support now, you sort of think of this black box. You call this 1-800 number, someone on the other side of the world, thank you for calling, and you have to do all this and that. And it's like you never, I feel like people aren't happy when they have to call their bank customer support, their credit card, or whatever, Amazon or something like that, right? Um, and Airbnb took the approach of saying, no, we're going to over-index on the support staff. We're going to hire people that were honestly wildly overqualified. You had entrepreneurs, you had people that started businesses, you had people that had gone to some like amazing college universities, right? That were
Wow.
doing amazing work, and they felt this connection to Airbnb and to the idea of being a host, right? And so we'd bring these people in, and I would interview, a few at the time, and it was like these are really smart, talented people that were often hosting very early on Airbnb. They had traveled the world, right? So they'd seen both sides of that. They can kind of put that level of empathy into their work. And I was blown away. And I mean, honestly, when I left, there was still, God, dozens, I think, of those early air crew employees still at the
Mm.
company doing something, this, that, and the other thing too, right? But it was an amazing team that they built there. And so I did that again, like for about 2 years. And then there was this moment in time, kind of back in Airbnb history, if you recall, it was called the EJ incident. And so it was this lady, I think she was in Oakland, had rented out her home or apartment for a week while she was traveling at a conference or doing something. Or, typical Airbnb story. She had checked in, everything was great. Oh, how's everything? Oh, I love it. Your place is so nice. She gets back after the week, and the place is completely ransacked.
Trashed.
Girl, it's not like, yeah, beyond just like some beer cans in the sink or something. It's spray painted. There's like drug paraphernalia. It's like someone came in with malice, and really bad intent for whatever reason. And it kind of came out, it started to get a bit of press, and it was this whole thing of like, see, I told you so. This is why you don't rent your home to strangers. This is why Airbnb, Air Bed and Breakfast is a bad thing, right? And so it started to pick up steam, and there was a bit of a sort of mismanagement by the executive team in terms of on the PR front too, right? And,
Oh,
and
yeah.
instead of like
Yeah.
making the story sort of just go away, they did some things that made it actually built it even further up. And so it was like people were hashtagging EJ incident on Twitter, and this thing was like becoming a massive scandal, right? And so I'm just sitting, doing my support tickets and everything with my headset on in Chicago, and just la la la, like kind of watching this almost as a third party, but like, wow, this is getting bad, and it's starting to get picked up, not in just like the tech crunch sort of tech, blogs and publications, but now it's like New York Times type of, it's
Yeah.
that kind of visibility. And so we got a call, and Brian basically just reached out to some of the people on air crew and were like, hey, we need you in the office in San Francisco answering calls. The phones are blowing up. People are going crazy. We're the company's at risk, right? And so it's this sort of moment, it's a pivotal moment in time. And I was like, all right, I'll be there on the next flight. And I literally like booked the flight the next morning. I'm in San Francisco. They got a phone bank around the whole desks and everything, and we're answering the calls, and Brian is right there. He's like catty corner to me. I see him talking,
Wow.
because hosts were now calling and saying like, is this safe? Should I do this anymore, right? And if you lose the host, and the supply, then there's nothing, where to book. We're back in 2008, right?
Mm,
And so we would be working, I kid you not, 14, 15, sometimes, 18 to 20 hours a day. I remember like getting home at midnight and the alarm picking back up at 5 a.m. and I'm back in the
mm,
office at 6
mm.
with the team, right? And we're like, tired eyes. But we kind of, the customer support team really propped up the entire company during those few weeks. And so at that point I saw it as an opportunity where I'm like, you know what? I love this place. I love San Francisco. This energy is absolutely electric in this office. The city is like, the tech boom was
Oh, for
happening
sure.
then.
Yeah.
And I was like, I'm not going home. I'm not going back. And so I just didn't go back. Yeah, I figured out the apartment. I'm like, okay, let's get this thing sublet. Let's find a place to live here. I had some friends that were already kind of had moved out previously from the company. And so I just got a room and I was there for the next 8 years. Which was crazy. And pretty quickly after that, I got asked and tapped to lead the move out of customer support at that point, back into more of a sales growth role, which is ultimately where I feel the most comfortable, and lead the North American growth strategy out of the San Francisco headquarters. And so
Wow.
applying some of the things they had done in Europe and kind of meeting with those people on those teams out there and understanding, how that all worked. And
They
then
kicked butt and took names over there, let me tell you.
yeah, no,
They
Europe.
really took market share. Like,
No, it was crazy. And it was all part of this company, Rocket Internet and Wimdu launched over there, and they had this crazy approach. And Brian and Joe basically took this kind of like, no, we're not gonna fold to these people. We're going to war.
they're going to take over.
And
Yeah,
they did it. And they did
they
amazing
did.
stuff in Europe. The teams over there, the people were amazing. I loved spending time over there and learning. And I was like, okay, how do we adapt what they did over there? It's a little bit of a different culture business wise. How do we
And
adapt that
totally.
to
I
the
got
US?
invited over there and I went to
Yeah.
their office and I was like, good heavens, this is like,
Yeah,
who can have an office like this?
I
How do you
know.
do this?
I know, and it was crazy, but it was,
Off the hook.
at Airbnb, it was much more of a design engineering led culture, right? Over there, it's like sales, it's
It's
growth, it's like pick up the phone and call 100 people a day, and you're like, and so it was like a complete shock when it's like, oh my God, right? And so I'm like, okay, how do I take this energy, this growth mindset, right, and it's kind of mold it into this a little bit of a different, non-sales type culture that they had currently at the company, right? And so we did a quick pilot, had 3 people that I kind of brought over from different parts of the company, and we had success there. And they were like, okay, let's run with it. And so eventually I had I think up to 15 internal sales account managers reaching out, calling, just literally picking up the phone, emailing, calling leads, convincing them to list on this website. It's free to list, 3% commission, next, right? And then we'd have the account management team that was sitting next to them, would kind of bring them through the setting up the
Set
account,
up and
the
everything. Yeah.
listing, making sure the photos and the description and all those things were kind of on point. And then eventually they get that first reservation and they're off, And so we were able to sort of, the growth had been accelerating and then it kind of had tapered off a bit. And so we were able to reaccelerate just through our efforts, that growth trajectory in these North American domestic markets. Now we're talking, so that's the difference. We're talking urban individuals renting out their space, which is, effectively a market that Airbnb created that didn't exist, right? The person in New York City that
Exactly.
wants to rent out their spare bedroom for a week or two here or there, like there was never a platform for that.
Like
So
Nashville, Tennessee. I mean, you guys took all
yeah,
kinds
no,
of markets that didn't have. There was no market there.
exactly. And we provide that platform and it was great that people could, on the host side, they could rent out this extra space that was being unused and they could monetize it, right? And for the on the traveler, it was like, wow, I can travel like a local, travel like a human was one of the first sort of, catchphrases that they had. And you could stay in the neighborhood and have a cool coffee and go to the cool show and not have to be locked into this, very tourist kind of trap area where all the hotels and you got your same kind of restaurants and you don't really get to experience the city too. So that was like this profound sea change that Airbnb was a part of. Then we did that for a few years and we started looking at these other markets and we started to get a sense of, okay, why are we not growing the same way in these vacation markets, right? And looking at a place on one side of the coast, you have like a Nantucket Martha's Vineyard, right? Which is how it all started because Brian wanted to take a trip with his family to Nantucket during the summer for a week, and there was nothing on Airbnb. And so he kind of knocked on our door, came to our team. He's like, Justin, like, what's going on in Nantucket? I'm like, well, I don't know. I've never been. I have no idea, actually. I'm focused on Boston and these other kind of urban places, right? And so he's like, okay, well, let's take a look at it, right? And so we basically took a handful of the current team, myself and three others, and he wanted us to have this, like, he called it like the SWAT team, the parachute in, right? So he's like, just go and just figure out what's happening over there and why we're not growing. And so literally got a flight, us three, took the ferry over to Martha's Vineyard, Nantucket, which, as I come to realize, are actually two islands. We thought they were the same. They're completely different culture wise and everything, right?
Culture
You would
wise
never
and
know.
everything. Yes,
They hate each
exactly.
other.
They,
Um,
they're a little bit
and
snobby, depends to each other.
Yes, absolutely. And so we had some strategies on things, and one thing worked in Martha's Vineyard, and one thing we were like, we definitely can't do that here in Nantucket. It's that's not the time or place to start putting a bunch of, like, postcards door to door or something like that. So we met with current hosts, we did community meetups, we did a ton of stuff. We were there for like 2 weeks, and we quickly realized that this was a market dominated not by individuals renting out their extra space. Sure, there was a few of those, but it was a property management
That's right.
led
Totally.
market, right? And these are second homeowners that have signed the contract over to this property management company who's managing them on behalf of them. And they're not looking at Airbnb as this cool new platform. They're looking at channels to fill their dates. And
That's
in
right.
in that market, it's extremely tight. It's Saturday to Saturday,
Yep.
June, July, and August. After
Yep.
that, no one's coming,
So
right?
they want you to fill the off season.
Yeah, so we kind of tried to get in there on the shoulder months and try to get a sense of, like, okay, well, here's what we can provide. Some places weren't even available. I mean, some people that we talked to, the family would come for 1 or 2 weeks out of the entire year, and it would just basically be empty the rest of the year, right? And so
Yeah.
it's just a completely different mindset. So we quickly realized, we traveled to a couple other similar markets, Orlando being kind of the last, and specifically like the Disney kind of area, right? As a, you know, as a vacation, it's a bit of a hybrid because you have a lot going on in Orlando, but the vacation market there, right? Specifically the kind of Disney area, and understanding, okay, we need to play ball. This isn't us going into a market and creating it. This is a market that already exists that we need to understand what rules to play by, right? And so that was sort of the genesis for the vacation rental professional host team launching at Airbnb. Brought in a really amazing executive, Sean Stewart at Jetsetter, previously the CEO there, to help kind of lead that charge. And it was myself and two other individuals that were basically on the ground, figuring this thing out too. And at the end of the day, look back 3 or 4 or 5 years later, we had a team of, including Hotel Tonight, over 300 or so people across
Wow.
engineering, design, product, everything, and over 100, maybe 150 API connections,
Yeah, you'd
right?
have to.
And that's how we won, and that's how we took the market
Yeah.
share from,
The API connections were
and that.
invaluable.
Because you
Absolutely.
can't, because we were asking before that, we were asking these property management companies, it's like, okay, you have 50 homes in the Texas Gulf Coast, wherever, call it South Padre or some, random kind of ski or sea market. And we'd say, okay, well, we'd love to have you list on Airbnb. And they'd say, okay, great. And we'd be like, okay, so first you need to, and we were playing with our old playbook. We would say, okay, first create an account, and then you go in here and you click list your space, and then
Then
you
you put your
add your
pictures
photos
up and you
and your
have, yeah.
description. And they said, listen,
I
I'm
already did
interested to,
that.
yeah, I'm interested to try. I've heard about you guys. We have 100 properties across the Texas Gulf Coast. This would take a team of five a week, a month, a year to do, right? Like, we cannot do this. And
And then you
so,
have to manage it because it changes.
and then a management stuff. So we were already asking them to do quite a bit, because it wasn't integrated, and just the initial lift of adding the properties alone was just too much and too onerous for
No, I
for
get
the
it.
majority of these property managements. If you're managing over 5 or 10 properties, you just simply don't have the time to do this. And not to mention, like you said, the management's so bad. So that's where we really started to play ball. We started to attend the VRMA shows. We started to build these integrations, and that's when, when you would look at one of these markets, we would be nearly 10x undersupplied compared to at the time it was HomeAway was, as part of the larger Expedia and Vrbo, but they'd have 10x our supply in some of these markets. And it was like, what the heck are we doing wrong? And so we finally kind of caught up and now have surpassed them in a lot of places too. But yeah, it was a whole another way of thinking about short-term rentals that really wasn't around and wasn't in place at Airbnb prior to that.
And a whole other expense center. Those APIs are not cheap.
No, no,
And they're negotiated individually.
yes, no, you have to definitely, yeah, and we were definitely a bit judicial in terms of who we integrated with originally, right? And what partners and what PMSs we wanted to connect with. And so we took the kind of slow burn approach, which I think was because we didn't want to add more complexities either. Right? We were figuring all this out
Right,
too.
of
And
course.
not to mention the API costs, but the
And they're not
engineers.
even standardized. The APIs aren't
No,
standardized. The amenities aren't standardized.
no, as we
And
know, it.
at least, well, they're more standardized now than they
Yeah,
have been actually. So yeah,
yeah. So we were, back to a lot of ways, my teams were focused on growth, and signing up, instead of the B2C, the individual that's, convincing them to rent their space on a short-term basis as opposed to bringing in a
B2B.
12-month tenant. Now it's B2B, right? Now it's working
Yeah.
with the PMS and with these property management companies locally to say, let's figure out a way to bring you on. And then that account management was so important too, to understand sort of what that share of wallet looked like between Airbnb and the other channels. Because at the end of the day, again, they didn't really care, right? Their job is to fill the dates at the highest occupancy and the highest ADR that they can
That's right.
for their owners, and they take their percentage of that. And so whether that
That's
comes
still the
from
name of the game. Hasn't
that's it.
changed.
That's it. And if they can drive as many direct bookings, that's gravy. But they understand that they need to play ball. And so Airbnb at that point had developed enough brand equity where they said, okay, we'll work with you. We'll work with your team. We'll figure it out because you guys are a major player now in the short-term rental world. But I'll be honest, it wasn't easy those
And
first couple of years.
you brought players in from Europe. So you
Yes.
brought players in from Europe, and there were pieces that they could add that you couldn't get, like for Verbo for the most part at the time, or Vacation, whatever Expedia at the time. And
Yeah. Yeah, there was a lot.
so
We took a global lens for sure, which I think was also smart too, because this obviously this idea has existed for, way beyond and before Airbnb, right? The idea of renting out your second home was around, when Verbo was doing, paid ads and classifieds, right? The back of the paper, right? He's like, oh, beach house, 2 bedroom available, $800 a week. It's like, oh, okay, cool. So this concept wasn't anything new. So it was, I think we were a bit as a company, maybe arrogant initially going in and trying to say, no, well, we're Airbnb. We're this amazing super brand. You need to apply and play by our rules. And they said, no, actually, we don't. Right. And so this is where I came in into those offices, right? Going into market and talking to people and these towns, right? These small beach towns, and there's this property management company, XYZ, local property managers, right? And I'd just go and knock on the door and we'd figure it out, and they're bringing in their 10 or 20 homes that they were managing and just keep going down the list.
this episode of How We Grow is sponsored by RevMax, the premier full-service revenue management system. Built for vacation rental managers who are looking for a market edge, RevMax offers data-driven tools and services that will increase revenue and drive more profit. Connect with their revenue management experts at getrevmax.com and discover their full-service revenue management solution. Let me ask you something. Recently, last year, there was litigation that affected third-party OTAs from property managers who got involved and said, hey, we need to be the merchant of record.
Mm,
And they did because of the contracts they had with their property managers, and the state got involved. Tell me your thoughts. Where's that going to go? How's that going to play?
I mean, I think ultimately the local towns and municipalities understand, especially in these vacation markets, how important tourism is, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
you know, they're not trying to bite the hand that feeds them in that sense. I think that was an issue we ran into, the merchant of record issue. I think Carolina, right, is a big has a lot.
Carolina and Alabama.
In Alabama, yes, exactly. Were two
Yeah.
markets that I was working very closely with. And so there was a lot of, regulatory work that we had to do with the kind of the legal regulation team, right, at Airbnb that I had to work with adjacently. We had to figure out some things, and there's the escrow requirement, right? And so there was a lot of supply that we were unable to acquire in the early days because we just didn't have those pieces in place. And at the end of the day, they said, well, if we're not the merchant of record and we can't keep these funds in escrow, it's required by law, right? And we can't work with you in your platform. And so I know
Yeah.
Airbnb is just another one of those things where Airbnb has to, kind of fall on their sword a bit and say, like, okay, we'll figure out something that makes sure that you're still, you know, um,
Merchant of
doing
record, but
everything
we have this control over whatever. Yeah, they'll figure out
exactly.
something. I don't know what they're figured it out. I should probably call my friends who were involved in that
Yeah.
firsthand and figure out how that is. I didn't know if you knew.
No, it's still always, and these things are a moving target too, right? And you're seeing that in New York City, right, as
Oh
a
yeah.
huge, massive market, and they kind of came with some sweeping regulations, which we've been fighting that since literally my very first day in 2010. It's always been something in New York City that they're for whatever reason, right?
No, I
And
understand.
and I think you're seeing that too. I think Airbnb has done, the tax team there has done a really masterful job of applying the collect and remit um,
Hmm.
kind of optionality on the listings that then, when you're the tax collector, you're that local legislator, that local municipality leader, and you start to get this yearly tax check, right? You start to take the things that they're saying a bit more seriously, right? And I think that's been a massive win for the company, for Airbnb, where they're you know mass markets, urban markets, vacation markets, small rural off the map towns, they're doing automatic collect and remit and saying, okay, great, here's your check, right, for the taxes that we've collected in the last year. And from a regulatory standpoint, you don't want to turn that down, right? So you start to kind of do the things and say, okay, let's work with you, Airbnb, as a partner to us, a partner to our tourism industry here. So, so yeah, I think they're at this point a little bit too big to fail in a lot of markets. It's just a matter of ironing these things out, and they take
Yeah.
time. You know, these
Time,
governments.
litigation, attorneys, and people to
That's
talk.
that's it. Yeah. So pay the money, take the time, do the things, but it'll all work out, I think, in the end.
Tell me this, what do people mostly ask you when you go to conferences or if you go to places where there are property managers? What's the biggest question you get?
I think be representing Airbnb, and we'd have our booth at Verma. A lot of them were looking for us to be that all-in-one sort of platform, right? I think it goes back to the problems that they're all trying to solve
Yeah.
with all this complexity and all these
Yeah.
softwares and all these things. And a lot of times they'd be like, I would love it if I could just list all my places on Airbnb. If you guys had the tools, right, built into the product that I would be paying for already,
Exactly.
give you guys a commission and make it as easy as possible for me and still fill my nights. That's like the holy grail, right? And I think we, you know, this is quite a few years away, but I'm, we had conversations with Streamline as a potential acquisition target, right? Because I think
Hmm.
we really
Hmm.
did look at their technology as superior in the PMS space. Um, there was a ton of talk internally about building our own PMS, right? And bolting that onto a sort of Airbnb Pro platform, which would
Right.
be a different set of rules and everything, but it would be much more applicable to the vacation rental industry.
Hmm.
So, and I would kind of mention these things. So it was always like, yes, we're thinking about it. Yes, we're looking at it. Yes, we hear you, right? Um, but they never, for whatever reason, fully dove in
They
as a
never pulled the
company.
trigger on that, which
They
would
never
have
did.
been smart. That would have been really smart. But
Yeah,
oh,
and
but
still
look at
is.
this. Let's take the Expedia model and what they did
Yeah.
and the successes they had and the failures they had for that.
Hmm.
When you think about the PMSs that they acquired, I think there are lessons to be learned.
Yeah.
But here's the other thing. I think that there's a lot of new technology coming out soon. I think in the next year, the next 18 months, we're going to see a ton of new technology and that's going to change the way that we do business. And so I think that if Airbnb wants an all-in-one platform, they should pay
Move
attention to
fast.
some things that are happening really, really quickly in the
Yeah.
space right now.
No, that's funny. Yeah, I agree. And I think, you run the risk of, I mean, like any big company, right? You start as a small guy, right? The David Goliath, and now you're the major player in the game. But, that's how it works in businesses. Eventually, the king of the hill gets knocked back down and a
That's
new
true.
upstart comes in,
That's
right?
true.
And if you can provide better service, better quality, a lower rate, lower commission, lower price, then ultimately that's where the consumers are going
Or
to naturally
additional
go.
functionality that saves you money, which is
That's
where
it.
that's at. That really is additional functionality. We're not looking to get rid of people by new functionality. We're looking to add productivity so that our people can do more to help our customers. That's
Right.
really what the game is in most businesses. So
Yeah.
that's really exciting. Um, so is there any advice or anything you'd like to share with people that are share with other property managers? Anything? I want to give you time to share something. I've
No,
been asking.
no, I've done the hosting myself, right? And I've worked with property managers. I've kind of seen the spectrum, right, of accommodations providers. And I think my advice, it goes back to make things easier, not harder, right? Because at the end of the day, you're turning these places over, you're providing the services that are required by the owners that's often out of market, right? Don't overcomplicate things. And I think that's when the stress really kind of comes and becomes a bit overwhelming, is when you try to do too much and have too many products and have too many technologies and this and that. And and growth, right? They're always trying to figure out, well, how do I get more homes under contract, right? That's at the end of the day, that's,
For sure.
you
I,
know,
I'm going to
and
shock you with something. You have to hear this. I had
yeah,
someone tell me last year. They were doing some new things in their company, their property management company, and they were no longer going to support their guest after 8 o'clock. It was just too much work for them.
mm,
I'm rarely speechless. I talk all the time, but that got me. And I was like, how is that going to work? If that works for you, good for you. If you can get away with not supporting, now not catastrophic things.
sure, sure, sure.
But I mean, most of us have a line, but
Well, no, and I think that's the mindset, is like, okay, we need to get more properties and we need to try to squeeze as much out of these, these owners that we can and the guests that we're servicing. But I think there has to be almost an opposite mindset of saying, let's do more with less. And by doing that, the growth will be natural,
yeah,
right? And you'll
yeah,
naturally acquire more guests, more owners will sign up, right? Because if you try to string you and your team too thin on these things, you're going to have churn. Your guests aren't going to be rebooking the next year, right? And so you're almost going to have this kind of, failure by process where and you alone as the head of the property management company, you're completely burnt out at the end
yeah.
of this,
And
right?
a lot of the people that do that they totally get burned out.
It's tough. It's such a tough life. The margins are so thin in this
Yeah.
industry that it's like, you really need to prioritize your life and figure out a way that you can still provide this quality of service that ultimately can build your own local brand, without sacrificing quality or quality of life at the end of the day, right?
Tell me your favorite guest or owner story.
My favorite guest or owner story. Okay, interesting. Now you put me on the spot here. So, um, my favorite. owner story. Okay, so there was a lady that we met. I'm blanking on her name, in Savannah, Georgia, which is one of the markets that we sort of it's kind of a hybrid urban business conference vacation market, right? And you have the beach, relatively close out there. Um, and so we spent about a month out there building up the supply and the host community. And there was this lady, and I can picture her face. We had a booth at the First Friday Art Walk in Savannah, Georgia.
Mm.
And people were completely confused. Like, Airbnb, I thought you guys were like a hotel company. Like, what do you guys like at this? You guys sell art now? And we had art from some of our hosts. We're like,
Oh,
no,
how
this is
cute. That's a
we
great
thought
idea.
we thought it was fun, and it was so cheap. It was like $50 for the booth, and we're handing out
Wow.
cards, we're talking to people about it, right?
Wow.
And we kind of ended, 3 or 4 hours there, and we were like, yeah, it was okay. It wasn't really, I wouldn't call it a success, right? And we looked back when we got back to the office, right, a few weeks later, and we were kind of going through all of our notes and all of our leads and everything and following up. And we were like, oh, what about, blank person at the art walk, right? She said her son had just moved out to college, and she's like, yeah, she's like, I have his spare bedroom. It's so nice. It's upstairs. It's got like its own private entry. So she's like, this would be perfect. We're like, you would be great. We kind of left it at that though, right? We came back a month or two later. She had already made like 10 or $15,000,
Oh my
um
gosh.
renting out, just as like this bedroom was going for like 159. It was like book solid. It was, she had like kind of redone it, and we gave her a call, and she's like, Airbnb, I love you guys. I had no idea. I'm making all this money. I love doing this. Like, I'm meeting amazing people around the world. I'm actually renovating my garage into accommodations now, right? And I'll do that. And so we look back, come on, and she had made like at the end of the year like 50 grand, and had become this like crazy, amazing story of like this platform, and that's sales and everything. And it's like, oh, how
It
many listings
changed
did you
her
get?
life. It may
It
have been a good
changed her
sale,
life.
but it did. It changed her life.
And that was it. Like, that's when you take something like that away, it's like, wow, this is really we had a profound impact on this lady's life from our brief, 10-minute interaction
That
at
was a
the
brilliant
Savannah Art Walk.
idea. I love that artwork.
Thank
That
you.
was a brilliant idea.
Well, we were trying to figure out, how do we get in front of a bunch of local people and let them know that this platform exists and they can rent it out. And it's like, I don't, our budgets were so thin at that point that it was like, what are we going to do? Right. And so that was one of the ideas.
And is
Um,
it when it went public,
yeah,
um, how did that feel?
it was sort of I guess, I don't want to call it the culmination of everything, but it
That's what I
was,
was thinking.
what was the coolest part about it though was that the company did an amazing job. They had like a live stream, like Zoom, that people could just like plug into, where they had like the office and like our community culture people that were sort of like just doing fun, like, oh, we're going live with so and so from, they were with us for 5 years back in 2012. They're like, hey, how's everything going? Like, oh, it's cool. Like, they're in Germany and they're just talking about what they do, and they have a family now. And they would do like a 10-minute little blurb with them. Then they do like a little fun event or something. And I was like, I had a group call with like 4 or 5 of our like old former employees and people that I'm still very close with and stuff. And it was just like, it was the company did such an amazing job of building this internal culture that I think you really, if you weren't part of it, it's so hard to understand. I truly, truly appreciated the people that worked for the company, and all the way to the top, to Brian, to the way that he, handled the COVID layoffs and things like that too. I mean, the guy genuinely cares. I don't think you can say that about probably 90 to 95% of CEOs, especially at big companies. Like, we
Yeah.
could burn and churn and we don't give a crap about
Yeah.
you, right?
Yeah.
And they really do. And that was in full display that day. And it was so fun. And I remember Brian was on, I think, like a CNBC, right? And it was gonna go at, I think, open at 60 something dollars. And then they said, oh, it's actually opening at like so and so 100 something dollars. And he had this, like, it wasn't even greediness. He was just like so wowed by it. And it was the first he had heard of it. And he was like, wow, wow, like, okay, there, people want to be a part of this, even as shareholders and buyers of the equity itself in this whatever investment.
Mm.
And it's like, people really truly appreciate what me and what this massive team have been able to build over the last, 12 dozen years or so. And to see that was great. I'm still close with Brian, which is cool, right? He's a billionaire now. So
It's crazy. Isn't
it's
that
cool to
crazy
be.
when you think about where you
Yeah,
start and where
yeah.
you end up?
It's crazy. And the
And
fact that he,
Justin, you're still doing property management. Think about that. Not only were you, you really grew your teeth,
yeah,
in this industry. And then even today, you're like loving what you do and you're doing property management still,
it's
but
the
for
same.
these really cool properties.
And honestly, Lynell, it's the same exact thing. You have these owners and these hosts and these people with this amazing property that want to share it with the world, right? Make a little extra money to help cover their costs, their exorbitant costs of maintaining these castles. I will say it's a bit more than your typical like two-bedroom beach house, and connecting them with these travelers, these people that want to
Mm.
have this,
Experience.
this
Yeah.
experience that you cannot replicate anywhere else, right? And so now you're not living like a local, now you're living like a royal, right?
Exactly. You're not,
Um,
you're the second person I've interviewed that really like high end. Well, actually, a bunch of people do high end, but when you talk about castles, and it just blows me away when you talked about the Druid caves, I was like, what?
no,
Are
no,
you serious?
I
I've been in
know.
some of those things, like some of the trips that I've taken, because I love to hike. And
Yeah,
some of the trips that I've taken, I've gone into caves where they do have the pictographs. I think they're called pictographs. I don't remember what they
yeah,
are, but they're just like amazing. I've been in Rome in those caves, and they have those there, and wow,
yeah. So
cool property.
that's in the Dordogne region of France, and it's bookable through Storied Collection too. So yeah, if anyone has a question or a desire to travel, and like I said at the top, it's really, these places are amazing and definitely very high end, but when you do the math and you break it down to the 10, 15 bedrooms, and you bring it, two or three families in, the price per room is actually, you know, right on par with your typical 200, $300 hotel room that you book
That's
anywhere in the
crazy.
world, right? And so it's like, I think that was the gap that we're trying to fill here from a an awareness perspective, is saying, like, you see these things on Bridgerton or on these shows, or the royal family, and you're like, oh my, I would love to experience that, just even if just for one night. And through our platform, you're able to do that. So
I have a bucket list. Mine's Versailles. When
ah,
I went, they couldn't stay there. That's my bucket list. It's really expensive, but it's still my bucket list.
yeah, no, that's right up there too. But
Our company
yeah,
ever goes public, I'll go do
there
that.
you go.
Justin, thank you so much for taking the time to do this, and I really appreciate you doing part two. I know it's a long interview. I don't do long interviews. Like in the whole time that I've been doing this is almost 2 years.
Mm,
I think I may have done three or four, but it's just that I get carried away with interest. So I appreciate you. I was so honored to have you, and I'm really
thank you.
grateful that you took the time. That's quite a story, and I think that people will be interested in that, in the trip, because it's like you're still doing property management. You're still doing vacation rentals.
That's it. It's a tale as old as time at the end of the day, right? So thanks, Lindell. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
I really had fun.
This episode of How We Grow was brought to you by RevMax. To find out more about how RevMax can help to grow your vacation rental business, visit getrevmax.com. Make sure to search for How We Grow in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Google Podcasts, or anywhere else podcasts are found, and hit subscribe so you never miss an episode. On behalf of the team here at Inhabit, thanks for listening.